Aloha everyone, this is Dr. BethAnne. I am an intuition guide and I teach on intuitive living and embodying our intuition. I'm also an author and I do a thing on Fridays called Poetry and Perspective where I share a passage from one of my books and then I share some perspective on the passage. So today I'm sharing a passage from the book Freebird Fridays, short story about this book before I read the poem. It's really close to my heart because I wrote it after losing my brother Brent in 2016, and we lost him in January, and I wrote this book in April of that year. And what had happened is I had this mistaken assumption that somehow the worst of my grief would be month one, and it wasn't. If you have been on a grief journey, then you learn that truth. For some reason I thought it would be better, like not better, but like that would be the worst of it. And then it actually felt worse in month 2. And then it felt even worse in month 3. And I felt such a heaviness and such a sense of loss and grief and death all around me. I really think some part of us dies when we lose a loved one, and we have to go through our own grieving process, not just for them, but for ourselves and how our life has changed and for what died inside of us. And in life cycles, rebirth does follow any death. And this book for me was the first spark of a rebirth, because what happened is somebody had given me a poetry book somewhere around that time, and I started thinking, could I write a poetry book? I was already a poet. I kept a blog and I was publishing poetry on it. And, I was writing articles for online places, but a book had felt really, really daunting and scary to me. And all of a sudden I found myself one day starting to put poems together, compiling poems, poem after poem, like going back through the blog, anything I ever wrote, taking what I love best, throwing out what I didn't like. And before I knew it, I had this like 127-page manuscript of poetry and prose. And that was the first draft of Freebird Fridays. And it was the first time that I felt a sense of hope and a sense of transformation after losing Brent, like personal transformation, where I was able to see that I was alchemizing my grief and using it in a way to create something beautiful. And I've published a lot now, so it feels funny to say this, but at the time I was terrified to put my work out there. What will people think? What if it's not good enough? And that was something else that I alchemized from losing Brent, is being more fearless and not being afraid of others, because I was like staring death in the face, and I had just been through this horrible thing that a lot of people don't experience until later in life. And I was like, I don't care. Like, I started to become bigger than my fears. So this poem is called The Road Less Traveled. The longer I walk the authentic path of the heart, the more I know that anyone who ever uttered the words, "I never said it would be easy, I only said it would be worth it," has also journeyed down the same road and knows that which is most beautiful and precious and worthwhile will never come easy, but must be chosen anyways despite all obstacles, as long as the terms of your soul calls you to go. Our soul often asks difficult things of us. It asks us to publish books when we're afraid. It asks us to end relationships or speak our truth or share something more vulnerable about ourselves when we might feel afraid. It might ask us to relocate to an island to follow your path in a much deeper way. It might ask you to move. It might be just trying to show up in the world on a day-to-day basis in a way that feels more authentic or more true. Some people have never spoken their truth in ways where they set boundaries for themselves or tell others no or really allow their true self to be seen. So sometimes our soul just says, be more real, be more divinely you. We all have our own soul purpose, soul journey, and truth of soul, but it does speak to us. And that's really the road less traveled. It's the road that the soul says, go do this. It might not make sense on paper, but we feel called in that direction. And it's often not easy. It is transformational, but that pull and the call of the soul is really real, and that's really the terms of ourself. It's the terms of our soul. won't let up once it starts saying, you need to do this, and when we really make that commitment and we start to show up and listen and we start to truly follow up, that is when magic happens in our life. That is when these radical shifts and changes start to come, because now we're really living from the soul. We're living from a more authentic expression of self. We're living from a deeper level. And when that happens, anything is subject to change, anything is subject to transform, and the path really starts to manifest before us because we've made that commitment to live and to walk the road less traveled by listening to the inner voice of wisdom within, which I also believe is how we hear from spirit, and it's how we hear from our higher self. The soul, our intuition, is an interface with all of those things. It's an interface with our divine and timeless self. So when we listen to it, get ready. It might ask you to do some pretty wild things. Anyways, I'll pause there for today. Thank you so much for joining me for this video. And if you enjoy videos, please feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Dr. BethAnne KW. I post daily content on intuition development, and I also offer courses and individual services on my website, BethAnneKW.com. All right, aloha and light, everybody. Have a fantastic weekend.